Hello and welcome to MMO Development Week 13, I believe, with me, Nelson LeKay, doing stuff with code. So today we're going to continue where we left off last week with CGS and get some more ANTLR action going. Right now we have a pretty straightforward, let me just remind myself what we wrote last week, pretty straightforward ANTLR combined grammar and an ANTLR tree grammar. And right now the tree grammar is just tossing some stuff off into the console for testing purposes because I wanted to show everyone how we could actually put together a tree grammar to parse the result of this combined grammar. Because if you guys recall, we have these little grammar rewrite doohickey guys right here that take in our token stream and turn them into a tree structure that we can then parse in a lot easier way. And we can see some examples of that with a few tests that we wrote. But the first thing I want to take care of is last week we saw how every time that we changed our grammar files, we actually had to go in and tell ANTLR to recompile our grammar files into our generated classes. So as you see up here, we have CGS lexer, parser, and tree, and we also have our tree tokens and our CGS tokens. Every time that our grammar changes, we need ANTLR to regenerate those files, and the easiest way that I've found to do that is with creating a little tool that watches for file system changes and invokes the ANTLR executable to regenerate that code. The reason I do that instead of using an MS build task, which is how a lot of people work with ANTLR, is that if you use the MS build task instead, you'll run into a situation where Visual Studio and ReSharper won't be able to pick up on your generated files, so then you won't get code completion, all that stuff, and ReSharper will throw a bunch of errors whenever you try to use any of the generated classes. So instead, we're going to put together a little tool that will recompile our generated classes. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to fire up a new instance of Visual Studio, and we're going to put that little tool together. The way I want it to work is I want it to be a little executable that if you start it with, I'm off on another screen right now looking for the folder that we have this in. If we start it in a folder like this is our CGS main root of our project. I want it to find the ANTLR executable by going into lib, ANTLR, and checking for the existence of ANTLR3.exe. If it finds that, I want to attach a file system watcher on this entire directory that'll be notified whenever our source files change. So it's going to be a simple little console application. I'm going to dump this into the appropriate folder, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, ANTLR File Watcher. Seems like a decent enough name for it. And then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to, first of all, the first thing that we need, obviously, is a directory that we're listening to. There are very easy ways to get the current directory, but for testing purposes, I'm going to hard code the directory as the literal path to where my current Cascading GUI Sheets project is, and then I'll refactor that to a little bit later to actually take into account you being able to launch this from any directory. But for now, we'll just dump that in. So the first thing we got to do is create our file watchers. And this is an excellent time to look at some MSDN action. So I'm going to Google file watcher C# and remind myself how this API works. So we instantiate a file watcher, we dump it into a string. Okay, yeah, I think I got this. So let's start off. Watcher equals new file system watcher in system.io, and it takes in actually also takes in one constructor that has a string filter. That's what I want to use. So I want to pass in the directory to watch, and then I also want to pass in filters. I want to monitor for G3. And is there any other extension that we use on ANTLR? Let me jump back to you. We use G3 and G3. Okay, so we're just going to monitor for G3. Then I'm going to create a occurs when a file directory in the specified path is changed. That seems like it makes sense. So I'll go ahead and do this, and I'll rename this update file. Then I believe there's a boolean that we have to actually check. Yeah, enable raising events equals true. And is file system launcher disposable? I can't remember if it is. So to check for that, I just got to click on that, hit F12, and watch as my Visual Studio goes all crazy. Look at the class definition, and it is a component. And a component is disposable, so it is disposable. I'll wrap that in a using statement. Okay, so we enable raising events. I can't remember if I have to do begins the initialization, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that. And is there something for... Okay, that's good. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter a while true loop and say var character equals console.read key. We'll see what that's used for later. But for now, I just want to make sure that my file system launcher is actually going to work. Or instead of doing a boolean, that I'm just like var running equals true while running if character dot key equals console key dot q, then running equals false. And then fine, I'll turn that into a const to make resharper happy. Now an update file, I'll go ahead and say console right line changed. File system event args, and then I can go ahead and say full path. So let's see if this works. Hit F5, and we have U. I'm going to bring this off onto another monitor, and then I'm going to change one of my ANTLR files. And I'm going to try to change it harder, or not. Okay, back to the documentation. I could have swore that it was recursive. Oh, you know what? I remember how I did this. Yeah, there's some issues with that particular API. The last time I wrote this was when I, well, last wrote it. I believe I ended up actually attaching the file system launcher directly to the individual files as opposed to the directory. Although for some reason I think I thought that this was going to be recursive, but it may well not be. Air filter. Ooh, include subdirectories. That's probably what I want. Hey, look at that. So we get 2 events every time the file is changed. Let's see if we can differentiate those 2 events so we only perform the compilation once. So I'm going to set a breakpoint and take a look at my file system event args and see, okay, so we have change type changed, and if I hit F5 once more, we get change type changed. So that really doesn't help me very much, does it? So it gets changed twice. And I believe that that may very well be a good time to go ahead and Google the file system launcher and see if it. I remember what I used to do before. Now that I'm starting to remember using this class before, it does do a change twice, and then I put in a little boolean flag to make sure I didn't invoke ANTLR twice. But let's see if there's a better way to do that. Change twice right there in autocomplete, and we get a Stack Overflow answer, And he says, this is a well-known bug feature. Wow, it's a bug and a feature. That's impressive. You may notice in certain situations a single creation event generates multiple created events that were handled. Two created events generated even though a single file was created. This is because Notepad performs multiple file system actions. Wonderful. Here we go. That's actually a rather, I just saw a rather brilliant solution to this problem. Check this out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make my watcher into a field. So I just used ReSharper to go ahead and do that for me. And then do you. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say watcher.enable raising events equals false. Finally, watcher enable raising events equals true. And give it a sec to initialize. Okay, I'm changing this file pretty hard here. Oh, you know what? It's actually sitting there. That console read line is actually preventing it from firing the first time for some reason. So that's odd. But whatever. It's not the end of the world. Okay, the point is now we have a single changed event happening. And I'll figure out why the console read key is actually preventing it from firing properly momentarily, because that doesn't seem very good. But anyway, okay, so we have update file. So we can go ahead and get the file. I'll go ahead and instantiate a new file info on file system event args full path. I also want to make sure that, actually I don't care. Hold on. I care if it's a changed or created, but I don't care if it's a deleted or, actually no, I just don't care if it's a deleted. So I'll filter that out. Sounds like a good idea. So now that I have the file, let's go ahead and fire up the ANTLR executable. But unfortunately, I don't know where the ANTLR directory is yet, which means I'm going to go ahead and create a private static string ANTLR directory. And I'm going to go ahead and say ANTLR directory equals establish ANTLR directory. Just dump that out into its own little method so it's a little bit more self-contained. Then I'm going to turn this constant, I'm going to pull it out onto the class for now. I don't know what I'm going to do with this quite yet. But again, this is an adventure for everyone. Okay, so we have an established ANTLR directory. So what I want to do is, if you recall, the way I want this program to work is I want it to, again, let me go ahead and jump into my appropriate folder. I want to be able to launch it from here. I want it to look for a lib folder, an ANTLR folder, and an ANTLR3.exe. That should be pretty easy to do, because I should be able to just do var directory equals path dot combine directory lib ANTLR. I think if I can say directory dot or directory capital D. Oh, wonderful! I have a name conflict right now. The directory constant is overriding the directory class. Wonderful. So let's go ahead and rename my directory to watched directory. And then I'll change this to if not directory dot exists directory return null. Then I want to say if not file dot exists path dot combine directory ANTLR3.exe return null. And actually I don't want to establish the ANTLR directory. I want to establish the ANTLR executable because I don't really care about the directory. So why did I do that? I don't know. But that's what resharper's for. So we'll rename that ANTLR executable, and then we'll rename this establish ANTLR executable. And then that pretty much simplifies my code because I can just say var ANTLR equals path combine watch directory lib ANTLR 3.exe, which let me double check that that's the ANTLR 3.exe. Yep. So if that file does not exist, return null, otherwise return ANTLR, which I can turn this into basically a single line of code. And then for readability, I'll break this out a little bit. Nah, I like that more. Okay, so now we have an established ANTLR executable, which will return null if it can't find it, which means now I can say if ANTLR executable is null, then console write line ANTLR not found under / lib ANTLR 3.exe console read key return. So if you can't find it, it'll just say ANTLR not found. So that's cool. Okay, so now we have to fill out this code right here, our update file. I'm going to break this out into another method. So just to get our code to be a little cleaner, I'll say recompile ANTLR file. So recompile ANTLR file, this method is going to go ahead and start up a process, pipe the output into my console, and show any errors that happened. So I'll start off with a straightforward process configuration. Config equal, I can really just do process equals, what is it? I believe it's process.start. And then I can pass in a new process start info. Process start info will have file name equals ANTLR executable. The arguments is going to be -o because I want to overwrite the output directory. And then inside of quotes, do that. So that's the output directory. And then inside of quotes, put the input file. So what's the output directory? Well, the output directory is always going to be the directory of the file plus _ generated. Because if you guys recall, I have so many windows open right now. If you guys recall, I have this nice little generated namespace where I want my outputted files to be. So I'm going to write a nice little helper method called calculate generated path for the file, and then arg1 is going to be file.fullname. Calculated generated path will just be return path.combine file.directory.fullname, _ generated. And then I want this to return a string. And yes, I know there's a null reference, possible null reference exception, but I don't really care about that. So those are our arguments. Next thing I want to do is I want to redirect a standard output. And then finally, I want to say use shall execute equals false because I don't want it to show up in a window. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap this in a using statement because processes are disposable. And then I'm going to, what am I going to do? Do something. Oh yeah, I have to open up my standard output. So I'll open up a stream reader, instantiate a stream reader, pass in process dot, what is it called? It's called standard output, actually. That's a good name. And then I'll go ahead and say SR or console write line. Oh, what are you complaining about? Blah, 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 blah. Standard output is standard output is a stream reader. Well, that makes it really easy. So then I can do console write line SR read to end, which will cause my process to block until ANTLR is finished, and then it's completed. So I'll go ahead and say console write line completed, And then at the top of this method, I will say console writeline compiling blah, where blah is file.name. So let's hit F5 and see what happens. Compiling CGS.G3, and it says completed. Yay. Now what happens if I toss an error into that? Error. Blah, 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 blah. Syntax error. Sweet. Okay. Next up, I'm going to let's see. We can make this look a little nicer. I'm going to say compiling blah, blah, blah. And then when I'm going to say string output equals, well, actually it can just be equal null. Instead of outputting the output right there, I'll say output equals. Then I will put a period right there as a write, not as, or as a write line, put this as a write. And then now that I have the output, I want to say console.foreground color equals console color.red. Console writeline output followed by console foreground color equals console color dot. I believe the default is light gray, isn't it? Or is it just gray? Maybe it's gray. I don't know. Can't remember. So let's see what happens. All right, compiling, and it's done. That's actually not a really good, let's go ahead and just say dash done, and let's do console foreground color equals white, followed by, there we go. That should be good. Done. And then if we throw in an error, we get totally not what we expected. So we have console writeline output right there. Often equals srv to end. Redirect. Windows style. Standard output encoding. Blah blah blah. See, right now it's functional. I just want to make it look pretty. Let's see here. What can we do about this? For some reason, the output actually isn't getting set to anything. So let's figure that out first. And what's our output set to? It is set to blank, meaning our standard output did absolutely nothing. Ooh, somebody raises a great point, actually. Let's do standard error, and let's also do redirect standard output as true as well. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to, for the standard output, well, actually no, I don't think I will need to do that, so ignore me. Now let's see what happens. Hey, that looks pretty good. Awesome. Okay, last thing I gotta figure out is why I need to type in a key in order to get it to actually start looking, which is kind of obnoxious. Let's see here. So good call on that standard error. I wouldn't have thought about that because I'm lazy and always pipe my console errors right to standard output. What would cause that not to work? or cause this not to work. It seems like it's some sort of race condition where my program has to execute some sort of user code before, or maybe it needs some sort of output, although that would be really weird. Huh. It needs some sort of output. That's kind of weird, but whatever. Honestly, it quite possibly could be a race condition, but if this works, then I don't want to spend too much more time on it. So I'll just start off with printing out a bunch of these. Why not? Okay, the last thing that I want to fix is I don't like that new line right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm only going to write this code if string dot, if not, string dot is null or white space output. Do that. And why not? I'll invert it. Ooh, that could cause my, there we go. All right. So, does that make sense, everyone? Other than the weird have to write out some sort of console thing in order to get it to actually start listening, which might be another random bug / feature on the file system watcher class, but it works right now, so that's fine. So the next thing I want to do is I want to turn watch directory into a field. Whoops. So I just take off const and I do private static watch directory equals, and then I'm going to say blah, and then I'm going to rename it. No, I'm going to rename it, or not rename it. And then at the top of my file, I'm going to say watch directory equals app domain dot current domain dot base directory. Then I'm going to go down to build out a release of this, Control-Shift-B, jump over here, open it up in my file explorer, go to bin, release, grab my little executable doohickey, and dump him at the root of my project. Alright, and then actually I forgot to test my tree, although my tree should work just fine. Yep, it does. Alright, so how's everyone feeling? And everything's silent. Oh, there we go. Okay, so now that we have that up, I'm going to dump him at the top of my top monitor for now and just leave it running throughout the rest of the course, or the rest of this class. And close out a U and find U and get to writing some awesome code. So let's talk about what we need to do with CGS at this point. Now, right now, if we go into my tests, we can do some basic stuff, but we can only, right now, we can only provide identifiers as values to properties. However, that's not going to be really what we want for the majority of the time. We're going to also want to be able to pass in resources. So for example, well, actually, you know what? Let me express what I want to do with the unit test. Where's solution anyway? Like, I can't believe solution's like missing this class after, but whatever. Let's say resource values on properties, and then I'm going to say parse CGS test, let's do a resource. So let's do background is resource, and let's toss in some quotes in there and say background.png. And then I want to say toStringTree.should be. And what do we expect? Well, we expect a rule, and that rule needs a selector, and that selector needs a class selector of test. And then that ends all of the selectors. Then we need a property of background that has the value of a resource of background PNG. Now there's a bunch of ways we can do that. I'm just going to go ahead and just put in, I want the value to be background.png. So yeah, let's see what happens when we run this test. We should get some errors. Oops, I didn't actually add my test to the session. Run. Okay, that's not going to work. Let's put you over here. Okay, so first of all, we see that we get a bunch of... Is there any way to make this vertical? I could have swore there was a way to make that vertical. Yep. Okay, so we get some no viable alts near my open parenthesis, which makes perfect sense because it's looking for an identifier, hitting an open parenthesis, and then saying, whoa, whoa, what's going on? So let's jump into our grammar and see if we can fix this test. If I go up to value, you'll notice that value is used on property, where are my properties? My declarations. Why did I call them declarations? I don't know. But yeah. So our value is used on our declarations. You see it says ident : value semi. So if we go into our value, we need to add the ability to have resource. But I'm going to toss in one more thing into my test. I want this to be case insensitive. So I want to be able to handle that if I wanted to. All right, this is going to be lots of fun. And when I say lots of fun, I don't mean lots of fun because I'm about to write something that's going to make everybody cry. You guys ready? I really should have... Honestly, I could probably write a Visual Studio macro to do this, but you know what? Whatever. So, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I... Everybody's laughing at me right now, I know. But... Or crying. I'm crying on the inside. Why didn't I write a script for this? A, B, C, F, G, H. Actually, honestly, it probably would have taken a little bit longer to write a script for this because I don't think I have any decent... This is something that would be probably fairly trivial to write in any scripting language. Unfortunately, I don't really have a lightweight scripting environment on my computer. I could fire up a REPL, but I don't think I actually have... Oh, I do have Node installed. I could have used Node to write this. Because I was about to say, I've been through a lot of different difficulties with Python and Ruby recently with their awesome versioning and incompatibilities, and I think I ended up not having those added to my path, and I can't remember where I dumped them on my file system. But anyway, you know what? It's done. So now I have a fragment for every single letter in the alphabet that matches case insensitively, which means I can now write a Lexer rule that Actually, hold on. I'm going to refactor this a little bit. I'm going to move my fragments all down to here. And then I'm going to make them look like this. There we go. So yeah, now what I'm going to do is we have an ident token so far, and that's actually really the only token that we have aside from our very simple tokens up here. So I'm going to write a resource token. And what's a resource token going to look like? Well, it's going to look something like RESOURCE. So, does that make sense to everyone? Let's toss in a couple others, actually. Let's do RGB, and let's do RGBA. So now we have an ident, a resource, RBGA, and RBG. And let me tab these guys over so they're a little bit easier to see, and then for consistency's sake, I'll just do that on the white space. Okay, we have an error. Tokens can never be matched prior tokens. Oh, that's because I have to put the RGBA above the RGB. Or not. Let's see here. What are you complaining about? Oh, because the ident needs to be below that. There we go. Okay, the way that the order of, obviously, as you just saw, the order of your tokens matters significantly. You'll notice that an ident technically matches resource RGBA and RGB. RGB also technically matches RGBA, at least the first bits of it. So we need to have them in the proper order so that the lexer doesn't get confused. So now that we have our value with an ident, let's go ahead and toss in a value for a resource. So how am I going to do this? Let's go ahead and I'm actually going to rename this. I'm going to rename this to L, or resource L. Actually, I don't really, do I need to? Nah, I might be able to get away with not doing this. So we can do value is an ident or a resource. Now the resource is going to be a parser rule that looks like this. A resource is a resource followed by an O paren, followed by a string, followed by a close paren. Now I don't think I have O parens or close parens in my rules yet. Nope, I don't. So let's add O paren equals open parenthesis and close paren equals close parenthesis. Now I'm missing my string rule. Now strings are going to be, unfortunately, kind of ugly. So let's get those out of the way. Underneath the string rule is going to be a lexer rule, and it's going to look like this. A string can either be a literal single quote followed by as many or zero to many things that are not. Notice how I put that little tilde at the beginning of this grouping? That means not. If it's not a tab or, whoops, a new line or a carriage return or another tab. And why am I putting in commas there when I should be putting in or symbols? The lack of syntax highlighting is driving me crazy. So then we go ahead and do that. And then as long as it's not another one of these, and then zero to many of them followed by an end single quote. There's one more alternative for strings, and that alternative for strings has double quotes. So the only difference between the single quote version and the double quote version is that the single quotes are in the single quotes and the double quotes are in the double quotes. And I don't know if that could be made any simpler. And we get a whole bunch of errors. Let's see. Reference to undefined rule E. What? Oops, I forgot my semicolon right there. Derp. And we still get a bunch of errors. So let's check this out. I did something wrong. Syntax error. No viable alt exception on CGS line 84. So let's look at line 84. And it's not surprising that it's the thing I just added. How would I go about making this not be problematic? Ah, I put an extra thingy in there for some reason. I don't know why. And it compiled. So let me make it look a little bit prettier, and then we'll leave it at that. And let's run our test and see what happens. Okay, expected string to be rule selector test background. Okay, what I want to do is I want to extract out the value of this string into a token of type resource. So the grammar is correct right now. Unfortunately, my rewrite rule is not correct. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a rule to rewrite my tree, and I'm going to change it to resource with the value of string and string.text. And let that compile, hit run, and see what happens. Okay, we're very close, but we have one more little problem. The problem is that our quotes are being inserted into our output. So what we want to do is, fortunately for us, this is actually C# code. So I could use .text.substring and be 1, comma, let's see, string.text.length -1. So what this is going to do is this is going to strip off my quotes, whether they were single line quotes or double line quotes. And I have a C# syntax error now, because length is supposed to be capitalized. Derp. Ooh, a lot closer. Now we have a rule background selecting blah blah blah. Wow, I just fail at math, don't I? Ignore that. Okay, now we have one more problem, but that problem is actually with my test. My test is actually incorrect. My test should be wrapping it like that. Hey look, we now have the ability to add in resources. So that's cool. We have resources and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and toss in something like, or bring in something like RGB values and hex values. So let's write a test. Public void RGB value on properties, RGB value, and I'm going to add RGB to my abbreviation list. And then I'm going to say parse CGS dot test background is RGB 25501 whatever, and then toString tree dot should be, and we have a rule. We have a single selector. It's a class selector with the value of test. Selector. That closes out our selector, so then we need our background. Let's see how we should represent our RGB in our tree. Because our RGB, we want to go ahead and extract out all of the RGB values. So the individual numbers of the R and G and B components. So what I want the tree to actually look like is something like RGB 25501. So that's what I want it to look like. And of course, if we run this test, we'll get a compile error for some reason, because I forgot to terminate it because I'm blind. Now if we run this test, we will get some no viable alt exceptions because it does not know what to do with RGBs. So let's go ahead and add on to our grammar and throw in a RGB color. An RGB color is going to be the RGB token followed by an open paren followed by 3 numbers. And I don't know if I have a number thingy yet. Wow, I can't even think. A number token, number lexer rule. That's what I'm saying. So let's go ahead and throw in a number lexer rule. A number lexer rule is going to be, at the moment, we can make it very simple in that we just need numbers. I'm not going to worry about anything like negative values or anything right now. We'll look at those later when we start getting into pixel values and stuff like that. Actually, it should be impossible for our RGB values to have negative numbers. So instead of creating a number lexer rule, I'm going to create a positive number lexer rule. And a positive number is going to be a digit of 1 to many. It's simple enough. What's a digit? Let's go ahead and define a digit as a fragment digit as 0 to 9. Now, because I defined the fragment digit as 0 to 9, I can actually replace this bit right here with the digit fragment, which seems to make sense. Okay, and we're getting another syntax error because, yeah, right here I forgot to actually put in my digits. So what do we need? We need a digit followed by a comma, followed by a digit, followed by a comma, digit followed by a comma, followed by a digit, followed by a digit, followed by a closed paren. And then my value is now an ident, a resource, or an RGB value. But guess what? That works. It'll parse it. Let's make sure I don't get any no viable alts. Ooh, we do get a no viable alt. Mismatch input 255 expected digit. Oh, wow. Derp. I don't want digits, I want positive numbers. So let's go ahead and run this one more time. And we'll still get an error because we get our comma tokens are put into the token stream and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and toss in a rewrite rule. But this is where things get tricky. So you saw how up here on my resource, I just did resource and then I referenced the string token by just doing $string. Well, how do I differentiate these 3 positive number tokens from each other so I can extract them into my tree? That's actually very simple to do. All we got to do is use a special built-in ANTLR syntax and say R equals positive number, G equals positive number, B equals positive number. Now we've aliased out our individual tokens that would otherwise cause confusion into our own variable names. So now you can rewrite this rule to be RGB, RGB. So I'm extracting out my 3 positive numbers into their own little things that I'm referencing down here in my tree grammar, or in my tree rewrite, whatever it's called. I can't remember what it's called. So now when I run this, let's see what happens. We get an error because it's expecting it to be uppercase, but it's actually lowercase. That's actually fine. I don't care about that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say RGB. Awesome. So let's go ahead and do RGBA. That is also very straightforward. The only difference is that the alpha, typically in CSS, the alpha is actually going to be a value between 0 and 1. So it's going to be a little bit more complicated. So I'm just going to copy and paste this test and say RGBA values on properties. And it's going to be RGBA, and then we're going to give it a value of 0.5. And then I'm going to say background RGBA is going to be 0.5. So let's see what happens. You should get no viable alternative. So let's jump all the way back into our, ooh, what are you complaining about? Ooh, let's go ahead and add RGBA to our abbreviation list as well. So we have our RGB color. Let's go ahead and write our RGBA color. So our RGBA color is going to be the token RGBA followed by an O-paren. We're going to extract out our RG and B just like we did before, but now we need our A. And our alpha is going to be a number that can actually be a float, basically, a value between 0 or 1, and it has to be positive. So I'm going to create a positive float Lexer rule that I'll be able to use. And for consistency, I'll say A equals. For the token stream that it generates, I'm going to say RGBA followed by RGBA. And now all that's left is I actually have to write my positive float Lexer rule. Now my positive float Lexer rule is going to be a optional dot, which I already think I have as a dot. Let me check. Yep, I do. An optional dot followed by a digit or a dot, 0 to many. I know this rule isn't perfect, unfortunately, but let's make it right. Ooh, I do need another comma. Let me go ahead and put a comma in between my positive number and my positive float. And then let's actually write my positive float correctly so we can't put in invalid float numbers into it. Although I would just like to be lazy, but whatever. So we have two options. We can either start with a dot and go into 0 to many digits, or we can have 0 to many digits followed by a dot followed by 0 to many digits. And that'll prevent us from putting in multiple dots into our stuff. I think that'll work. It compiles. Let's see if it fixes our test. Failed. No viable alternative at input RGBA. So let's look at that. Ooh, I forgot to add my RGBA color to my value. Compile that, run that. And look at that, success. We now have RGBA values. Let's go ahead and throw in our 3 nibble hash values and our 6 nibble hash values. So let's do 3 nibble hash color on properties. That's going to be, let's do pound FFF. What I want to do is I want to have this be RGBA for the one on the alpha won't work due to lack of question mark after the dot. Let me make a test of that. RGBA on value 1, run this, and you are correct. Mismatched input 1, expecting positive float. And the reason it's not going to want to do that is because I always require a dot for some reason. Why did I do that? I don't know. Here we go. That's not going to work either. That should work. Question mark after dot. Ooh, that's not going to work because my positive number will actually override positive float. Actually, oh, wonderful. This is going to be fun. Let's go ahead and get rid of the concept of a float versus a number. I'm going to change this to positive number because otherwise the rules are going to conflict and I don't want to add in a bunch of ors into my grammar. So let's do positive number, positive float, and then run this one more time and see what happens. Failed, expected, positive float. Where do I have my oh, hold on. I forgot to wait for it to recompile. Yay. Okay, so positive number, that's fine. Actually, I won't be able to differentiate that between positive numbers and negative numbers either without putting in a bunch of ors. So you know what? Let's just write a number rule. This is getting ridiculous. I'm going to write a number rule, and it's going to handle positive and negative floats or integers. So I'm going to change all my positive numbers to numbers. And to handle this, all I really got to do is support the concept of a dash, which I believe I already do have a dash. Do I have a dash? I thought I had a dash. Maybe I don't have a dash. So, fine. And I breaked it. Because I forgot to change this to that. There we go. Now we have numbers. Positive or negative floats or decimals. And of course, yes, I do realize that I forgot to apply the potential for being negative to either of those. So let's fix that, rerun all our tests, and make sure we didn't break anything. And then we'll do 3-nibble hash properties. There we go. So what do I want the background to be if we have a 3-nibble hash value? Well, I want to go ahead and normalize all of my hash values straight up out of the gate. So I want to go ahead and turn a 3-nibble hash value into a 6-nibble hash value. So to do that, I can go ahead and say, let's add in a color hash, and then the color hash is going to be FFFFFF. So I think that should be just fine for what we want to do. I think. Probably. And if it's not, we'll fix it later. So we have a background color hash, and the color hash is... Ooh, that means I'll need a rule for my color hash in order to do that translation, but... Wonderful. Let's actually just make this easier. I'm going to say color hash FFF. I'm going to write a color hash Alexa rule, and my color hash Alexa rule is going to be hash, which I believe I have already there with hash. Yep. It's going to be hash followed by 0 to many nibbles. So let's do nibble plus. And then let's do fragment nibble. And what's a nibble? Well, a nibble is a digit, or it is A through F, or it is capital A through capital F. So now I have my color hash. I'll go back up to my value, and I'll change this to color hash. But if it is a color hash, I want to... Actually, no, this should just work, shouldn't it? Expected semi. Yep. What do I get? Background FF, color hash FF. Ah, that's fine. Because remember, this string right here is actually a color hash token, which means I'll be able to very easily pull it out. So I don't even need to have the concept of that. But I do want to... I do want to chop off that hash symbol. So I'm going to write a color hash parser rule that will chop off that pound symbol for me. So what's a color hash? A color hash is a color hash, but it's turned into a color hash with the text of color hash dot text dot substring at 1. And does that compile? It compiles, so I'll change that to U. Run U again and see what happens. Actually, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's good. Awesome. But check it out. I broke a test. So let's look at what I broke. It says line mismatched input pound B expected O curly. Ah, it's matching this as a color hash. Wonderful. That's not what I wanted. That's not what I wanted at all. How did I fix that before? That seems like a really... Oh, wow. You know what I did before? I can't believe I did that. Okay, we're going to go on break, and then I'll explain a horrible, horrible hack that I did before. So I will be right back. All right, and we're back. So let's go ahead and fix my color hashes, because right now what I'm getting is my color hash token is actually overriding what happens with my ID selector, because they're actually very similar in how they work. So to fix this, I'm going to move the parsing of a color hash out of my lexer and into my parser. So I still want a color hash token, but I don't want it to be matched to anything. I want it to be emitted into my tree. So just like I did before, I'm going to put a color hash up there at the top. So it's not going to be matched to anything, but I'm going to be allowed to rewrite my token stream using this new token. So then in my color hash, let's fix this. So a color hash rule is going to be a hash followed by either 3 nibbles, 3 nibbles, or a hash followed by 6 nibbles. And what I want to do is I want to rewrite my token stream differently depending on if it's 3 or 6 nibbles. So let's go ahead and alias these out. I'm going to say R equals nibble, G equals nibble, B equals nibble. And then in this one, I'm going to say R1 equals nibble, R2 equals nibble, G1, G2, B1, B2. And then the way that I'm going to rewrite this is that I'm going to have a color hash, and I'm going to turn it into its own little subtree. This one is going to be R, which I'm going to do that. And then it's going to be, no, wait. Actually, what I want to do is I want to do R dot, and then I want to concatenate that to itself twice. So how can I do that? I can just do R dot text plus R dot text. I wonder if this is going to even work. I don't know if this is going to work. Let's see what ANTLR says about this. Ooh, it freaks out. Probably because of this one. So let's just turn this into a color hash for now and see if I can even do what I want it to do. No, it doesn't really like that very much. What's it complaining about specifically? It says syntax error mismatch token on line 91. So it really, really, really doesn't like this. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how we can write a method on our class. So at the top of my file, I'm going to write a method that will take in 2 strings and turn them into 1 string. Or can I do string dot concat r dot text r dot text? Won't this work too? It really doesn't like that either. Oh, that's because I wanted to I need to turn this into a token. So to turn this into a token, I will go ahead and Let's do an ident token. There we go. I like that. Sweet. So I'll do ident for R, and then G, and then B, and B. Now on my other alternative, what I'm going to do is I'm going to write ident with r1.text, or r1.text. Actually, it's going to be basically the same thing, except for I'm going to use r1 and g1 and blah, blah, blah. So instead of that, it'll be r1.text, r2.text, g1.text, g2.text, and b1.text, and b2.text. And I forgot my semicolon. Awesome. So let's see what happens now. Now we fixed our for child selector, but our 3 nibble is freaking out. It says no viable alternative at input hash, mismatched input semi-expected colon. Color hash, let's look at this. Color hash is used right there. It's a hash with 3 nibbles, which we have a nibble defined as a digit or A through F or A through F, which is good. That's what we want. Ooh, but a nibble might be overridden by a digit. Oh, wonderful. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to a nibble just to be the alphanumeric definition of this, and I'm going to make it appear above that. And then what I'm going to do is change this from nibble or digit. And we still don't like that. No viable, because FFF doesn't get turned into a nibble. It gets turned into an identifier, which there's no way around that. Okay, so we're going to back up and do what I did before, and it's going to be really gross and really ugly, and everyone's going to hate me, but it will work. So I'm going to change color hash. I'm going to remove all of this stuff, remove that concept of doing that. Okay, so now we're back to where my my for child selectors will fail because it has an ID selector in it. And then we'll have this, which works, except for it's missing, of course, it should be pound FFF. No. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into color hash. I'm going to change color hash to be a hash or a letter. So it's going to accept everything. I'm going to remove the concept of a nibble. So it's going to be a hash, a letter, or digit plus. And then I'm going to change my ID selector to, instead of doing hash ident, it's going to do color hash, with my ident being color hash, with the text of my ident being color hash.text.substring1 to remove the hash mark from it. That should fix my for child selectors test, but I'm still having an issue with my hash not being removed from that. Why are you not working right? Color hash gets turned into that. We remove the hash mark. Let's go ahead and jump into a debugger real fast. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to extract this into a tree, and then I'm going to set a breakpoint, and then I'm going to debug this test. And I'm going to see what type of token it's trying to turn that color hash into. So let's go ahead and navigate our tree. Go to base, children. We have a selector that. We have that. You have a base, children count of 1, which is FFF, and it has a type of 10. So its text is $FFF, and it has a type of 10. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find out what type of 10 is. 10 is a color hash. So it is turning it into a color hash, but for some reason it's not respecting the fact that I've told it to chop off the first character. If I were to remove this rewrite rule entirely, I wonder what's going to happen. The rewrite rule, it does nothing. Guess why it doesn't do anything? Because I was using the lexer rule for color hash, not the parser rule for color hash. Hey, look, it works. Okay. So let's try a 6 nibble hash color. FFF, and then let's do 0, 0, 0, and that should be FFF 0, 0, 0. Run U, and it works. Okay, so we have our RGBA, RGB, 3 nibble hashes, 6 nibble hashes, identifiers, and resources. I'm trying to think if there's any other values that I want to put together quite yet at this point. Let's toss in a number. Now in CSS we can have a number, and it can also be annotated by suffix like px, pt, em, or a percentage. So let's do that one. So we do have a digit fragment, but we don't have a number rule yet. So let's go ahead and add a number. Oh, we do have a number rule, derp, which is good because I want to write a number value parser rule. Number value parser rule is a number followed by pixels or points or percents, and the suffix is optional. Pixels is going to simply be .px. Points is going to be pt. And, oh, sorry, I want to make these case insensitive, so I'll just throw in a percent, which is obviously not case insensitive because it's a symbol. And then for my guys down here, I'll write pixels as px, points as pt. Now a number value, I just want it to turn into a number token plus its suffix. That makes perfectly sense. Perfect. Wow. Sorry, an error of percent came out on my screen and I kind of, yeah, there we go. So all we got to do is now in our value add an alternative for a number, which could be a number followed again by pixels, points, or percents optionally. So let's go ahead and write a test for our numbers. So test public void naked number on property, which is going to be parse CGS dot test. How about margin dash left equals 40 or equals 0? And that's actually technically the only valid CSS that you can do without a suffix. Two-string tree, and then it should be a rule followed by a selector followed by a class selector followed by test, and those two open up my margin left property and then do a 0 right there. So let's see what happens. Okay, naked numbers work. Let's do naked numbers. So how about, well, actually there should be no such thing as naked numbers because the only valid one would be -0, which doesn't make any sense. So instead of doing naked numbers, let's do pixel numbers on property. Let's do 10 pixels. So this should be margin left 10 pixels. Run this, and it works. Let's do negative pixels. equals negative 10px, negative 10px. Run it again, see what happens. And we get a failure. So we got that, but it... Wonderful. It's unfortunately turning this into an identifier. And the reason it's turning that into an identifier is because my number is below identifier. And remember, in CSS, identifiers can start with a dash. So by moving that up, that should fix it without breaking anything else. And of course it didn't fix it, because that would be too easy. It's because of that px suffix. The px suffix is not being applied, or it's not matching a number, unfortunately, at this point. And it's not going to match a number because, yeah. Actually, I don't know if this is valid CSS. I don't know if you can have a dash followed by immediately with the number. But you know what? I don't think that's ever going to be used ever. So I'm going to make my grammar actually deterministic, I'm going to prevent the ability from an identifier starting with a dash for now. So if I go into my ident start, let's remove the dash. Typically in CSS, those dashes are only used for, what are they called? Ooh, I broke everything. They're typically only used for I have to add vendor-specific prefixes, which we're not going to have any vendor-specific prefixes, so it doesn't really matter. And I fixed everything. Sweet. So, next up, we have negative pixel numbers on property and pixel numbers on property. Let's add percent numbers on properties. So margin left equals 50%. This should be 10 followed by the percent token, or 50 followed by the percent token, which is actually going to just turn into that, which is fine. And it works. So we have percent numbers, negative pixels, pixels. Let's add in points. Point number on property. So let's do, how about font size is 12 points. So font size is 12 pt. All right. So, how's everyone feeling so far? Sweet. So we have our grammar really starting to take shape at this point, but we're missing some very important things with our grammar that we should go ahead and resolve. That I think I can go ahead and resolve in the next 30 minutes, so that next week we'll be off the actual grammar and into our tree grammar, which is a lot more important. So let's start off with, right now we have pseudo selectors and descendant selectors, and the way that they're represented are with children. Do I have any examples of a multi-selector in this at all? No, I don't have an example of a multi-selector. Let me add that to my test to make sure that even works. Multiple selectors. So multiple selectors would be .test, comma, pound, parent, comma, e, or how about ULLI. And then we'll go ahead and have no properties, which I believe my grammar does allow for rules that have no properties in them. Yep, it does. So what should this turn into? This should be a rule followed by a selector, followed by another selector, followed by another selector, followed by nothing. So to fill in these selectors, the first one we have is a class selector, the value of test. The second one is going to be an ID selector, with the value of parent. And the next one is going to be a little bit more interesting. It's going to be a selector. It's going to be a element selector with the value of UL, followed by another element selector with the value of LI. And semicolons are important. Okay, so it failed. Let's check this out. You know what? I forgot to get rid of my comma token. So let's do that. So inside of my selectors, I have comma selector. Let's get rid of commas. Whoops, wrong way around. Because comma is, yeah, there we go, and it works. So our multi-selectors do work, but we have other kinds of selectors. We have our child selectors and our multi-selectors, but we also have our descendant selectors and our immediate descendant selectors, which we have to take into account. I'm not going to worry about sibling selectors right now. So I'm going to write another test for public void immediate descendant selector, and just for Justin, I'll do that. Okay, so we have our immediate descendant selector, which is going to look like this. Now, what this should look like is a rule followed by selector followed by a element selector or class selector, the value of test. But then it's going to have a relationship as an immediate descendant. I totally forgot the uppercase Control-Shift-U. I can't believe I always forget that. No, Control-Shift-U, not Control-Shift-O. Hate my life. Let's just click on it. There we go. There's our immediate descendant. So we have an immediate descendant followed by an element selector followed by A. Now, what I want to do is I want to start putting the concept of an immediate descendant or a normal descendant in between all of my nested selectors. So I'm actually going to change the way everything works, or the way that my selectors work. So I'm going to go ahead and refactor all my tests to do that. So for example, test hover, this is going to have an immediate or a normal descendant. Then you are going to have a normal descendant between these two selectors. And then you are going to have a normal descendant between each one of these after the pseudo class. And then you do not need any descendantness anywhere. Okay, sweet. Hey, look, I broke everything. So let's start off with my fixing this problem right here, where between all of my selectors I need either an immediate descendant or a descendant. So to fix that, I'm going to locate my selector. If there are multiple selectors, I need to know their relationship with each other. And that's only going to happen in this guy right here. Or no, it's only going to happen right here, child selector. So it's going to be a child selector and an optional descendant type, or relationship rather. So it's going to be 0 to many of you guys, and you guys are going to all have a relationship. Now, the relationship is going to get really tricky. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an empty rule that turns it into a descendant, just to get all my tests to pass. So remember, I have a descendant and I have an immediate descendant. And for now, I'm just going to make relationship equal that. I don't even know if that's a valid ANTLR. Oh, I guess it is. That should make everything work. Kind of, maybe. Expect the string to be blah, 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 but blah, blah, blah didn't happen. Maybe I didn't wait long enough. Oh, well, yeah, that one's going to break. But this one shouldn't. So let's go ahead and see how I can insert a immediate descendant into this relationship. So the relationship is right there. So how about this? Let's go ahead and look at my grader. Let's add at fixing this for everything. So let's add a grader, and then on my relationship, it's going to be a grader, or it's going to be something else, which I'll talk about in a second. If it's grader, it's a descendant. Or an immediate descendant. If it's a white space, it's a descendant. So how do we know if the preceding token is a white space? Well, this is where things get complicated. They get complicated because our white spaces are hidden or placed on the hidden channel. So there's really no easy way within ANTLR itself to put in the concept of was the preceding token a white space or not. Fortunately, that's very easy for us to write. So at the top of this file, I'm going to add a method to my class. And I can do that by doing parser members. Anything inside of this block will be added to the class that that ANTLR generates for me. So I'm going to do bool is last token white space, which is going to be return input. What is it? Something like this. Remember, there is an input, which is an iToken stream, and an iToken stream has a method called get. And then it also has I thought it had an index. Yes, it has an index. So I can use get combined with the index to get the last token. So I can say input.get input.index -1 dot type equals white space. Then I can use my what's called I can't remember what it's called, a predicate, but it has a special attachment to that, whatever. But what this does is this will only run because I added the question mark at the end of my block of code. This alternative will only be matched if shut up. This alternative will only be matched if this expression returns true. So let's see what happens now. Okay, so let's see what happens with our immediate descendant. But rule selector, class selector, test, element selector A is a length of 55. That means our relationship is not being put into our derp. You guys see what I'm missing, right? I'm not actually, I'm matching the relationship, but I'm not actually putting it into my tree. So I want it to appear after my pseudo selector. Well, that broke everything. Let's try that again. Okay, so let's see why that broke everything. ANTLR tree rewrite empty stream exception rule relationship. So for some reason it's empty, or it's not. Let's see here. Why would you do this to me? We have a relationship inside of here. However, it's interesting that this works, kind of. At least it doesn't destroy ANTLR and blow it up. So let's look at this, or how about this? Rule selector, class selector test, immediate descendant, element selector A. The A isn't capital, and I have I'm missing a parenthesis. Okay, so immediate descendants will work. However, anything that doesn't have a descendant will not. I wonder if I have to make this optional, but I shouldn't have to. Because if I do that, I'm going to get errors for different reasons. Or I'm going to get the same error for the same reason. Selector, ID selector. Selector type, followed by a pseudo selector, followed by optional child selectors. Let's figure out why this is being awful to me. This is where things get really complex with ANTLR. Let's try this. Let's move the concept of a relationship into the child selector and see what we get. Sweet. So now, or no, we get the same error. Rewrite empty stream exception. I'm going to Google this real fast and see what exactly that means. So yeah, for some reason it really did not like having my relationship be inside of my child selector up here. Oh, I think I kind of know why. Because the child selectors are printed out right there. And I was trying to extract out my rewrite or my relationships when in reality we could have had a bunch of these, and in fact they're supposed to be nested. I don't know if I'm expressing myself right, but there is a reason I can intuitively see. I'm just having a hard time articulating it. But I was extracting out the relationships before the child selectors got hit, and then I was sticking my relationships before all of the child selectors, which caused a lot of confusion. But the point is, we now have immediate descendants and descendants. So let's look at our code here. Now the goal for our trees are to be very easy to parse and very easy to write our own logic for constructing an in-memory representation of our selectors. So if we look at this, it should be fairly straightforward to put that together, because what we can do is we can look, okay, we have a selector. Inside of our selector we have a class selector, which has a relationship of immediate descendant into an element selector. And I think that's a fairly sane way to go about having our rules work. So I'm trying to think, is there anything else in the language that we're not yet handling? Does anybody have any suggestions, whatever, you know what I'm saying, about any bit of syntax that you guys would want to see? Because I think this pretty much wraps up what I wanted to do with the combined grammar, and the next step is going to actually be taking a look at our tree grammar and getting this to turn our tree from, well, just a basic tree into an in-memory representation of our selectors. I did forget comments, didn't I, actually? I just realized. Let's do comments. I'm going to support single line comments and multi-line comments, even though technically CSS doesn't do single line comments on some browsers. Okay, so what should this toStringTree dot should be. This should look like a rule that has a selector, that has a class selector of test with a property of margin being 0px. So that's what it should be. Let's see what it really does. Wait a sec, did I already add comments to? Nope, I didn't. Here we go, sweet. No viable alternatives. So let's go ahead and strip comments out of our language. So I'm going to jump all the way down to my white space, and I'm going to throw in a line comment. A line comment is going to be this token, so 2 forward slashes, followed by anything that is not it's going to be very similar to strings. I want to follow this by anything that is not a new line or a carriage return, and I want 0 to many of them, or 0 to many of those. Then I want to match a new line. Actually, I don't really need to do that. Let's see if this will work, because I think my white space token will take care of all of that for me. Nope, it does. Sweet. Okay, let's do multi-line comments. So I'm just basically going to convert these into multi-line comments. And just for kicks, I'm going to toss in some valid CGS into the comments to make sure the parser doesn't pick that up, which it shouldn't anyway. Toss in that, toss in that. Sweet. Also, this is getting kind of annoying. I'm sure there's a way. Yep. I'm going to turn on show only failed tests, because all those tests are starting to make it very difficult to find which one's failing. Okay, so let's put in our multi-line comments. So our multi-line comments look like they open up with this, and then they close with that, and their channel is hidden. In between these two symbols, I'm going to have to find anything that isn't a end to my multi-line comment. Unexpected character EOF expecting star. Anything that isn't that token, I want to... Oh, you know what? That's not a single... Oh no, that shouldn't matter. I wish I had syntax highlighting, honestly. There is a plugin for Visual Studio that adds syntax highlighting, but it doesn't work well with Visual Studio 2012. So we do anything that is that. Okay, so let's see which one is failing, because I'm going to go ahead and chop off everything but one of them and see if it could have been the one just because it was right next to the end of the line. No, it's still eating everything. So let's see here. There is one more way to do this, although from what I'm looking at, this should pretty much work. One more way to do this is kind of similar to how regular expressions work, where I can actually add in an option to turn off. I'll just show you guys. Where I can make it non-greedy, which is similar to how like I said, regular expressions can work with their question mark, but for some reason that isn't working either. Let's see here. Oh, that did work. Derp. I just told it to run before it had a chance to... Yeah, you know what I'm saying. Okay, so we got single line comments, we got multi-line comments, we have pseudo selectors and nested selectors with two types of relationships, descendant or immediate descendant. We have multiple selectors, we have ID selectors, class selectors, element selectors, resources, RGB, RGBA, hash colors, positive numbers, negative numbers, pixel numbers, point numbers, percent numbers. So how's everybody feeling? Unless everybody like died in the last 10 minutes, which is more than likely. Okay, so here's the grammar. I mean, it could be a little bit cleaner, but it works. It does everything that I need it to do. Again, the whole purpose of this grammar is to take text and turn it into my tree that I can use later to parse and turn into an in-memory representation of my selectors using my tree grammar. But the tree grammar starts to get a lot more complicated in certain areas because we have to worry about actually injecting in C# code that will instantiate the proper objects. I wonder if I broke that yet. Yeah, I broke the existing tree grammar. Don't worry, we're going to be rewriting our tree grammar next week. And then once we get our tree grammar rewritten, we will then have an in-memory representation of our selectors. And we would have, at that point, successfully gone from this to something that we can use in our code. So yeah, I think that pretty much wraps everything up here. I don't know what else I want to throw into my combined grammar, because my combined grammar seems to be pretty solid at this point and should serve pretty well once we get into our tree grammar. So I guess to all you future people, I'll see you later.